to represent, that the purported velocity of a circulation is immaterial, because you always have enough circulation to immediately convey commercial activity, trading that any given property for any other given property. And a further observation, which might conclude this matter, is that if we lack that, we have been deprived of just reward for our production. So we can see then, furthermore, from that latter observation, that it's actually incumbent upon us, if we are going to preserve just reward, that the circulation must equal, effectively at least, the remaining value of any existent level of production. And then so we can return to our solution in mathematically perfected economy of this first categoric fault in circulatory inflation, deflation, and maladisposition, that only an eradication of interest, which eliminates maladisposition, and a schedule of payment which maintains a circulation which is always equal to the remaining value of production, which is to pay and retire principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property, resolves this issue. You see, so already we have one solution, and we in fact find that if we deviate that from that an iota, if we charge some interest, if we deviate from this obligatory schedule of payment, we have either inflation or deflation. You see, so there is no other solution for inflation, deflation, maladisposition, and even price inflation, but eradication of interest and this obligatory schedule of payment. Now, in the case of systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, which I give to be the second categoric fault, I'll return to that after addressing the third one, which is inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest. Well, obviously, if interest multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to the circulation, and this engenders terminal failure, there is no solution for inherent, irreversible multiplication of artificial indebtedness, but eradication of interest. Moreover, as we've already demonstrated, we have to eradicate interest to solve inflation, deflation, and maladisposition. So, we've solved our third categoric fault, that is inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest by an obligatory eradication of interest. Our second categoric fault, as I give it, is systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. Well, this was an issue that it took me a while to resolve. In other words, you know, this very day that I was in this economics class, and the teacher, you know, gives the definitions of inflation and deflation, and then says that circulatory inflation causes price inflation, and I object and basically prove this is impossible, that even that in abiding by our obligation to collateralize all debt, in fact, circulatory inflation is in fact impossible. Now, you mentioned inflation, so we have to come back to why it's impossible, beyond this need to collateralize, which makes it theoretically impossible. Of course, if you violate the rules, still the question is then, if we are violating this rule for which requires us to collateralize debt, could we then have inflation? Well, we can, but how do we establish that is a question. In any case, when I went home from school that day, excuse me, obviously there was a mathematically perfected economy in regard to our first and our third categoric faults. But what about all the other things? Well, you know, I knew I had an important idea, but you know, it just was compelling enough that you know, I had to examine you know, everything that I could conceive of as being a possible further problem. And I did this for some while before I realized that all of them, nonetheless, related to a pattern which was consistent with my proof of inevitable failure, in that the only powers, systemic powers, to manipulate the cost or value of money or property, which is a category definition, which I ultimately realized described all other remaining possibilities, was merely a result of, on the one hand, the potential to corrupt volumetric principles which we needed to abide by to solve these issues. That is our first categoric fault. Potentially in combination with this multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest into terminal failure, or our third categoric fault. And these things result from the only powers which are endowed by this obfuscation of the promissory obligation. So, in fact, then, this what I give as the second categoric fault, or systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property. Ultimately, this is a consequence of the same powers that we've resolved by our first and third solutions. So in the case of solving systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, our first and third solutions must be preserved integrally to solve all other potential faults of the economy. So it's just that simple. Basically, then we're only solving the first and the third thing. The third thing being by eradication of interest, because interest multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to a circulation. And after all, we're only saying that the bank for $2 can't charge $300,000, $400,000 in interest on a $100,000 debt which didn't even exist to it and was never therefore at risk. Now, in the case of solving inflation and deflation, likewise, we have simple basic arithmetic here, in which eradication of interest, so that the entire circulation can be dedicated to industry and commerce, by eradication of interest, which solves maladisposition. We need to solve inflation and deflation, which are defined to be increases or decreases in circulation per, I prefer to say, represented wealth. Well, the only way to maintain a circulation which always equals the remaining value of represented wealth is to monetize, potentially to monetize all industry and commerce, at least to monetize what is represented wealth, and thus to pay out of circulation and retire principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation, which itself, without any regulation whatsoever, merely by implementing an accounting system, perpetually maintains a circulation which is always equal and immutable, therefore, in representing remaining value of represented wealth. So that, in a nutshell, is mathematically perfected economy. Now, note, in our solution of all potential faults, which fall under three categories, in our solution of all potential faults, there's no need for reserves. There's no need for a gold standard. In fact, what a gold standard or a silver standard or precious metal monetary standard or any concept of a finite standard, fixed, static standard, what the faults of those things are is it doesn't adjust to the wealth that we need to represent in a way that the value of currency can be immutable and none of us can ever be offended. What we have devised here in our solution of three categoric faults is, in fact, the only prescription which accomplishes this vital object of an ever immutable circulation. So this is why there is one and one only actual solution of the categoric faults of any plausible concept of an economy, because there is one and one only solution for inflation and deflation, which is this eradication of interest and obligatory schedule of payment. There is one and one only solution for inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial injustices by interest. And that being eradication of interest, and of course our second categoric fault, systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, is a combination, requires a combination of those two solutions. So we've already solved systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, so long as we make our first and third solutions inseparable. So mathematically perfected economy in the end then is nothing but an accounting system, and that accounting system simply allows there's two concepts of privatization. People say, issuance of money should be in private hands. Other people say it should be in government, but they don't give the conclusive facts which would establish either case. So it's a question between the two. And the advocates of privatization who say that banks must issue our currency, I mean Matt Taibbi, who's taken this up since I originally wrote him, but he's not accounting for all the issues, and I watched him a few years ago on the Bill Maher show state that everyone knows that banks have to issue our currency. He's a good example of this, and so are many other people in the Paul forums and whatever. They advocate that money, and Hayek does this in his paper, which is titled A Free Market Monetary System, and it's not about freedom at all. He advocates that government can have this power to issue private currency. And in the case of Hayek's paper, this guy is so absurd. He's claiming that government does have the power in 1970 when it is private corporations, and he's saying that privatizing it would fix all the problems without providing a single principle or means or justifying argument how. He's even totally wrong that the Federal Reserve is federal. It's not federal. It's 12 private corporations. It is a very private money he's advocating would solve all the problems of the private money he's referring to as if it's government issued.
Yeah, I've always had a bit of a problem with people saying that the solution is to we can't rely on government to issue our currency. It needs to be privatized.
Well, if we can't, it's why. The thing is, any credible authority doesn't just say this or that or another thing, because if we do that, we have what we have today. We have people just saying things against each other.
But what I'm saying is that the money is virtually privatized now.
It's absolutely privatized, and that's what I'm getting at. The problem with that is, the narrow-mindedness, the tunnel vision of that proposition is, what do you mean banks should issue it then? No money comes into circulation but by issuance of one of us of our own promissory obligation. All the bank does is pretend that no more than publish evidence of that at almost no cost to itself comprises a debt to us. They pretend the role of creditor then, while denying the real creditor interest and saying this debt that never existed to them justifies interest, as if there was some risk of losing what they never had and never gave up.
So what is his justification behind that? Because I can't see any.
There isn't any justification behind that privatization. Moreover, why is that?
The free market argument.
That's not. That isn't a free market at all. In fact, it's a market.
Yeah, I understand it's not, but is he extending out the whole free market argument to money? Is that where he's coming from? Even though we know it's not free.
These guys are contradicting themselves that it's a free market, and of course they won't even engage in those discussions. Not only that, I mean, the pattern of their work is so preposterous that in Hayek's speech, which is now preserved in this paper on von Mises' org. Just look up free market monetary system and Hayek and Frederick